Last week, as I mentioned at the beginning, we looked at the whole words that often appear in the Bible around love. And we looked at two words in particular. We looked at the word ahava, which is in the Hebrew language, and we looked at how that spoke into the great command that Jewish people say pretty much every day, in much the same way, hi Romany, as we say the Lord's Prayer. And they recite this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul, and love your neighbour as yourself. And it's so easy for us to just nod our heads and say, oh, that sounds about right. We do that sort of thing. And then we looked at the word agape. Where's my friend Tina? Tina's sat at the back. For those of you who are joining us at home, Tina's mum is Greek. Tina came up to me at the end of the service in Banwell and she said, what's this word agape? And I went, well, that's what I've always called it, but it's actually agape. Do you know that? Well, you do now. So if you ever end up in Greece on holiday or whatever, don't go around saying agape, because people go, what? You always know, we're worshipping in Congsbury this week, and you always know those people who are not quite in the know when they say Congresbury. And you sort of go, Congresbury? I don't know the word Congresbury. It's Congsbury. And so it is with agape. Is that right? Roughly-ish. Tina's putting her thumbs up. That's brilliant. So we've all learnt something. But what's beautiful about that word is the fact that it's translated not by just comparing it with the Hebrew word. The people who built the meaning around agape based it on the work and life of Jesus himself. Isn't that beautiful? If you want to understand what agape is, look to Jesus and read his life, and indeed follow his life, and then you'll understand what agape is. I love that. That was last week. This week we're going to look at how we can put it into practice. If you can put the next one up for us. I wonder, you know, one of those there's many quizzes on the television, isn't there? But one of those quizzes that says, what is the common linking factor between these four things? A bottle of wine, bookmarks, the feast, the Jewish feast called Sukkot, or Sukkot, Francis of Assisi, and two triathletes hugging one another. Don't worry, I'm not expecting you to come up with the answer, but all these things do have a common link. And of course, it's what we're talking about today. The power of love and the power of relationship, and seeing the world in relationship and through relationship. I want to begin with the first of those, if that's all right, Kirsty. That's it. So the first one is about a bottle of wine and about some bookmarks. We have some wine here, which we'll use a little bit later. A couple of weeks ago, we started having services on a Wednesday here in church as a midweek communion. It's something we've done for years and years. And one of the congregation at that Wednesday morning communion knew that Jan and I had become grandparents. And we have two beautiful little babies in our lives as grandchildren. And this gentleman spoke to his wife, who makes bookmarks. And she spent ages making these two beautiful bookmarks for our two grandchildren, Patrick and Evelyn. And this week she gave them to us. My little heart burst. Isn't that kind? All the hours gone into all this stitching. I don't know whether you can see it at home, but hopefully you can. All the stitching, all the colour, each stitch is a sign of love. And I was so proud and so grateful. I hope you've all had a similar experience in your life, either as the one to whom a gift has been given, or you have chosen to give the gift to others. I don't know about you, but in my special box at home, I still have all the birthday cards that the kids made over the years. The shop-bought ones, the funny ones, they're great, but they come and go. But it's the pictures they drew and the cards they made. Yes? One or two people are nodding. I wonder whether you've gone to sleep, or are you with me? I hope you've all... Yep, Sarah's putting her thumbs up. Brilliant. My hope is that you've all had that experience. And of course, Jesus turning water into wine is far more than just an act of kindness. But on the other hand, if it was all the other things without kindness, there would be something lacking. And my point is, from this first particular idea of water and wine, is that it becomes blessing. And blessing is a beautiful thing. And it's more than beautiful, it's a powerful thing. Because it can make your heart fill up with love. And one of the things about blessing is everybody can do it. It's not about how much you know, or about how much intellect or status or whatever you have. Whatever your age, whatever your background, we all have the ability to bless and to allow ourselves to be blessed. But we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So the wedding at Cana in Galilee. What turns your week from water into wine? What are the issues that maybe are going on in your life at the moment which feel as though, well, they could either be mundane, or even worse, they could be painful or hurtful? And what will help you to realise that they can be turned from water to wine? Are you somebody who just sees all the problems in our world? And goodness me, there are a lot of problems at the moment. But you know the sort of experience you have, don't you? Do you ever get yourself into one of those ruts? Surely not. Where all you do is find the problems in everything? Some people are actually built like that. Some people have been shaped like that because of all the hurt and the pain they've been through. But they don't know their way out. And they're stuck there. But the good news is Jesus comes to turn water to wine. And he does it in abundance, and it'll be the very best wine. Because he chooses to want to bless you and the world. Isn't that great? I'm getting one or two nods here in church, everyone. I hope you're nodding at home. So the next point. Next one, please, Kirsty. The Festival of Sukkot. Anybody a really Jewish expert here? It's actually known as the Festival of Ingathering or of Tabernacles. Ingathering, picking up from the book of Exodus, and Tabernacles, picking up from the book of Leviticus, and they put them together. They have Yom Kippur last week, and then they have this week of festival, which begins on the 2nd of October. And they're in the middle of it now. What's that got to do with what we're talking about? Well, the idea of tabernacle and of harvest sort of go together, because it's about thankfulness. Do you know what you do if you're a Jewish person? You would put a 4-poster bed up here, well, actually outside, but you could put a 4-poster bed over the altar here, and you get some dining chairs out, and you would put palm branches over as to make a bit of a roof, and you would decorate your 4-poster bed, and you'd make it really, some people go quite some length, fairy lights, a bit like we do it at Christmas, yes? You've got your fairy lights, you've got your music, you've got your beautiful meals, and you do this for 7 days. Imagine starting on Christmas Day and keeping going right the way through. Maybe you do that anyway. It's amazing what you can do with a turkey, isn't it? So the whole idea is you meet outside and you share food with others. And it's a time of celebration, but also a time of thankfulness. and a time of recognition that actually all things come from God. That's where it links with harvest. Because often at harvest time we remember that actually all the things we eat, all the things we just take for granted, the little things, the simple things, as well as the big things, they all come as gift. And Sukkot is the time for doing that. What's interesting is you've now got quite a sizable community of Jewish Christians. They call them Messianic believers. And their particular idea, because they love this idea that God works in circles. Yes? You've got this idea of God works in circles? So, just to give you an example, particularly a Messianic Jewish believer would say, Moses commanded Joshua to walk through the River Jordan when they left Egypt and went for their walkabout and ended up crossing into the Promised Land. Yes? Remember that story? Getting some, just nod and that we can get through this much quicker. Right, okay. So Moses sending Joshua and the people through the Promised Land, crossing the River Jordan. Hundreds of years later, Elijah and Elisha also crossed the River Jordan. Guess what? At the same place. And then you roll it on another few hundred years, and Israel has got into difficulties. They're taken and carted off into Babylon, and they come back from the exile. We're doing a crash course in Old Testament, aren't we? Crash course, they come back. Where did they come through? The River Jordan, at the same place. When John the Baptist pitches up and starts baptizing in the River Jordan, at the same place. Where's Jesus baptized? In the River Jordan. Do you see? God works in circles. It's different every time, but always from slavery to freedom. And so, the same with the Jewish belief around Sukkot. And they've gone into quite some detail about this. Do you know what they think? That Jesus was born probably at Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Indwelling. And the reason they believe that is because what is the kernel of our story of Christmas? Emmanuel, God come to be with us. What better feast to arrive at than Sukkot, where you'd actually meet around a table full of thanksgiving, recognizing everything is gift. And then they go into much more detail, and you're looking at me as it was meant to be the 25th of December. How dare you, Vicar, challenge our belief that it was actually at the end of December. I hate to bother you, my friends, but we're not quite sure when Jesus was born in terms of the time of year, probably round about 3 BC. But the reality is that it makes much more sense that he was born around this time, at harvest time, the great ingathering, the great time of coming together and of celebration. In much the same way as we link Jesus' death and resurrection with the Feast of Passover. Yeah? You're looking at me as though I've totally lost it. But do you see how it's almost like Jesus fulfills the Old Testament? And if you can go with this for a moment, the reason why this is important in the conversation we're having about relationship is if this was in any way near true, and even if it wasn't, take the idea, if nothing else, this idea of Emmanuel. You see, one of the big problems we have in the Western church, and particularly in our Anglican church, is that we've got stuck in our heads. We've got stuck in our heads. Because we've made, strangely, our faith around belief. And it's as much as possible for a vicar to convince people to believe in this day and age. But actually, it was not about belief. Belief is only the foothills of a faith. Faith is about relationship, and that wonderful word in that quote from John 15, verse 9. It's that Jesus says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. That can be belief. But now remain in my love. And so actually remaining in love is not just about believing in somebody, it's about wanting to love them and indeed to be with them and to love them as I love my grandchildren and for them, allow them to love me. It's a much different understanding of our faith. And I feel sorry because the problem is that many people have built their experience of faith on what they know. But actually, it's more than that. It's meant to be much more than that. And what I find so often now in the church is those people who think, a conversation goes something like this. They say, oh, Matthew, I'm not very good at all this. I don't feel very good at prayer, and I don't really understand all the Bible. Anybody feel like that from time to time? Obviously, we've got a bunch of experts here in church, right? Okay. At home, perhaps you feel sometimes, well, everybody else must be brilliant at prayer. Everybody else must be good at reading their Bibles. Everybody else must understand everything. And actually, they feel inadequate. And yet, strangely, what I find is in that humility, often it's these people who will be the most willing to do the acts of kindness and the acts of love and will put themselves out for the other person. And Jesus has some very strong words to say about all this. Because if you read through that story, he says, unless you remain in me, then actually you become like a dry branch. And if you then are a dry branch, you will be cut off. And not because you're not worthy, it's just the fact that actually you've lost the point. And in fairness, it's not your fault. It's been people like me. But all I can encourage you today is to renew your faith, to find joy in your faith. If you love praise music, put your praise music on. I've put up in the list of songs for today a wonderful version of O Come, Emmanuel. You know that song we usually sing at Advent, which announces Christmas? Calling on God to come. Do you yearn in your heart for God to be with you? He is with you, but do you yearn nonetheless? Because you can always grow in this love. And you think, gosh, are you telling me he's going to come and spend his life with me, in me? And the answer is yes, he will. Don't keep him at arm's length. Emmanuel, Sukkot, is the feast and the celebration of allowing God to become close. And it's a beautiful thing. But we've lost sight of it sometimes. Especially when we get into the detail. Do you find that? It's so easy to lose sight of this when we get into the detail. We say, I believe this then in my head. I've got that in my head. All right, I'll buy that. And then something happens and immediately, bang. That's gone out the window and we're now in, well, you've offended me, or you've done this, or you haven't done that, or whatever. And we bounce out of it. It's about allowing God close. And strangely, in that feelings of inadequacy, even of helplessness, of vulnerability, God changes us. And in that changing, we can find joy. Richard Rohr, one of the great Franciscan writers, used to talk about how it feels like falling, but actually you're growing. It's upside down, isn't it? Really annoying. When, like Howard, I always feel for Howard at this point, because he's got libraries of books. I've got libraries of books. But the books actually don't mean that much unless they enable me to grow in my heart. This is the thing. Not just knowing it, but loving it and living it and loving him. Next one. Do you like the Feast of Sukkot, by the way? You're going to go and get palm branches out now and build a 4-poster bed, aren't you? You could always try and eat outside. I think family would probably go, what in the world are you doing? Imagine a barbecue. St. Francis of Assisi. One of the great things about today is it's the 4th of October. And little Franciscans all over the world are going, yay! Because it's the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. What has St. Francis got to do to help us to discover more about this idea of relationship? Well, we could spend the whole morning and more talking about Francis, because probably next to Jesus, he is probably the most written about saint and person in Christian history. But also, he did some wonderful and incredible things that maybe might help you to see the bridges of how he saw in terms of relationship. He's often known as the patron saint of animals because he loves animals. You ever had one of those bird tables with Francis of Assisi? No? Yes? You ever seen one in the garden centre? They're not so common these days, to be fair. But I remember a lady I used to visit. She always had a bird table outside the front door with a little bowl of water for the birds, and Francis of Assisi holding out his hand, and that was the bird table. Nice, isn't it? But can you see how he saw himself not over creation, but in creation? He was the David Attenborough before David Attenborough. He could see it. And children can see it. But it's a beautiful way of seeing. He's also known for somebody who, at the time of the Crusades, when the Muslim community and the Christian community were so clearly at odds, with nothing in his hands apart from love, he crossed the divide between the roughly around Cairo Basin and went to see the Sultan Al-Kamil. And what was really great was it just so happened to be one of those moments in time where the Sultan Al-Kamil was also a person of great wisdom, and together they became friends. And they built relationships that have lasted 800 years. That's why those of you who've been to Israel will know that all the key points and places within the Christian tradition are looked after by the Franciscans. That's because they honour a promise that the Franciscans were men and women of God. Wouldn't that be amazing when you think about building relationships today? Or do we just stand behind our barriers and become dogmatic and defiant? Who's going to reach out the hand of friendship? Francis isn't just being kind or nice. He's actually being a bridge builder and a peacemaker. And elsewhere in the Bible, Jesus has got a lot to say about peacemakers and those who can see with the eyes of God. What's also interesting about Francis of Assisi is that he cried a lot. That's a bit awkward, isn't it? I don't know whether you can see in this picture, but his right eye actually has a tear in it because he wept for people. And in fact, he struggled with blindness towards the end of his life. I don't know that glaucoma is actually related to crying a lot, but the point is he carried people on his heart and he cried for them. This way of relationship doesn't just make everything nice and beautiful. It actually means you carry quite a heavy burden where you see people and then you see your own mistakes far more clearly. All the things you wanted to do on your to-do list and you haven't got to yet. It's so much easier just to say, oh, well, never mind, that doesn't matter, it's fine. Actually, Francis would cry often at the end of a day because he carried the people on his heart. Next one, please. And last up, 2 triathletes. What's that got to do with all this? Well, there was a race recently called the Santander Triathlon. Have you come across this story? Dave and Mike, they're into sort of big sporting. Yeah, you've come across it, Mike? It's a wonderful story of Diego Diego Mentriga, I've got to get his name right, and James Teagle. James Teagle is a famous triathlete in Britain, and Diego Mentriga is a local athlete in Spain from Barcelona. This was an important race. It was right up in the World Series of triathlons. And what happened, and I've tried to put the picture as best I can, if you can see at home, the picture on the left-hand side is where James Teagle, if you've swum a mile, 1,500 metres, then you've cycled 40 kilometres, which is 25 miles, and then you've run a 10k race, which is 6 miles, you're going to be pretty tired, aren't you? And probably what happened was his blood sugars or whatever went so low that when they came to a sharp left-hand bend, James Teagle didn't see the crash barriers. And he just ran into these crash barriers and hurt himself. Diego Mentriga was right behind him, and they were vying for who was going to be in third place. They'd followed each other around the whole course, all the triathlon. And what happened was, it was so easy then for Diego Mentriga just to have ran on. But he ran and he got to the finish line and he stopped. And he waited for James Teagle. And he said, "You were first. You've been ahead of me all this race. You go in front of me." And he gave up being third place and getting a medal and not being on the podium. Isn't that incredible? Not just on a park run on a Sunday or a Saturday, but in a world-class race which had implications for his own ability and where he stood in the league and the table of things and all manner of things. But no, he said, "You first." And it's gone into legend all over the athletic world. It's reported in most major countries. And my point is this: even in today, when people offer kindness in sacrifice, in relationship, others notice. They do. We do, don't we? Whether it be opening the door or saying thank you, or just offering any kind of courtesy, but how much more if it was something like this? It can change the world, but it involves sacrifice. And it happens in the most random and most unexpected of places. The question is, as a church, do we see? Or is it just head down and we're just worried about our stuff or getting through our church business or whatever? The problem is, sadly, sometimes it's the church that are the most blind. So this stuff is not just random stuff. This is the stuff of God, and it changes us. Next one, please. So to wind up, what are the connections between all these things? Well, I would encourage you to maybe think upside down. Those things that you don't think are important and you don't think you're good at are actually the things that are supremely important and need to be part of our lives, both individually and as a church. Random acts of kindness aren't just about being nice to somebody. It actually has a way of blessing, and that blessing is powerful and it changes the atmosphere in the room. The second thing is that about prayer. Prayer is not just about asking God for loads of stuff or to try and sort everything out. Prayer, at the best prayer, is often about thanksgiving. I'm convinced that if people spent a moment each day in prayer of thanksgiving and of praise, they would change. If you know somebody who's going through a really hard time at the moment and perhaps is just seeing all the negative things and all the down things, and okay, as I said, there are a lot of those, or they're the sort of person who just finds fault in everything, I would suggest maybe especially if they're a Christian, maybe the point is they've lost sight of thanksgiving and of praise. Put your music on, play it loud, smile, and it will change you if you can see it as gift. Third thing, notice that actually it's not about just easy stuff. I've put up the picture on the left-hand side at the bottom of the Queen meeting Martin McGuinness. It's one of the iconic pictures for me. The very organisation that represented those who killed her cousin, Lord Mountbatten, she went and smiled and shook hands and looked him in the eye. And I think the world noticed. And good on her, and to a certain extent, good on him. But this is how God wants to change the world. Not through power and force, but through forgiveness, compassion, and seeing. And so it's not surprising that it all brings us back to the cross. When you think of the vine and the way the love goes out from God and comes back to God, ultimately it comes back to the cross. And it stands as a testimony to love over the world. And that's why we will always need to talk about relationship in the church. Because it's about love. And that love is the reason why we're here. And I give thanks for the fact that you are here and you're joining us on home. You could be doing 101 other things this morning. You could be shopping, you could be playing sport, you could be trying to do the London Marathon. Anybody trying to do the London Marathon today? Ruth, did you manage all your runs for the half? Brilliant. Ruth managed all her runs for the half. But you've all chosen to be here, and people will join in during this week because they're looking for something, hoping for something. And the good news, he's already here because of what he's done for the world. We'll leave it there. Next week we're going to be looking at spirituality and about how to develop that spirituality. We've touched on it today with regard to prayer. But I hope these things have made you think, especially for those of you here in church or those of you who are joining us at home who really feel maybe you're on the margins. What can I bring? So many people, especially the elderly, have said to me during this time, I've got no purpose. What's the point of it all anymore? You know, I'm just sat at home watching the television. Well, the point is, actually, you can be a blessing. You could choose to phone somebody up. You could choose to do some act of kindness. You can let people bless you. One lady I visited, she actually has discovered that all she needs to do is say thank you to her carer who comes in 3 times a day. And it's changing her. Isn't that wonderful? Bit by bit, her anxiety is going down and her love is growing. This isn't arbitrary stuff. It's the work of God. We'll leave it there. We're going to sing.